Hey everybody, my name's Dr. Jonathan Lopez, and I'm many things in life. One being a Marine Corps veteran, the other being a dad. That's the most important role I have. So I started this podcast to interview dads and just discuss different topics with experts in different industries and really tackle everything from fitness and fun to faith and finance. Tune in, like and subscribe, and we look forward to having you every week. Welcome to Rad Dad Podcast. Hey, welcome everyone. I'm Jonathan Lopez, and I decided to start a podcast called Rad Dad Podcast. And the reasoning behind that was, the pandemic hit 2+ years ago, and I had a lot of time to think internally about, who I was as a person, who I was as a father. And while I believe I'm a great dad, there's some concern about how to raise a young boy into a man during crazy times like this. And what I did was I read The Boy Crisis. It kind of concerned me about how much information is in there and really how we're letting down our kids, not only from a boy standpoint, but how that affects the overall society. And, it just intrigued me on how do I become a better dad? And how do I influence other people to be better dads? So, the reasoning behind that is I have several friends that I always ask, for advice. And it could be dad situation, could be professional. And I thought, man, I know a lot of rad dads. So why not interview them, talk to them, and encapsulate that knowledge that they have on being a dad, being a professional, balancing everything. And my first guest today is Spencer Smith. I know Spencer, he has a podcast, Self-Funding with Spencer. I've been on. If you're not in the insurance world, it's boring. You won't know, you have never heard about it. But we talk about insurance, and we talk about the industry and what things are changing, innovative ideas that are out there, and really get to know more about the companies that we work for and work with. And, Spencer is one of the people that suggested I start a podcast. And, the idea behind this is to turn it into a book so I can hand it to my kid and other kids. And I know there's a lot of people out there that, don't have a father figure. And, in the boy crisis, they kind of pointed out how that leads to less educated people in the world and less educated males. It puts a damper on society. So, Spencer, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us all about who you are.
Awesome. Well, Jonathan, thanks for having me, man. And I appreciate what you're doing here. I think the purpose obviously is very large. And I applaud you for taking that first step, which is to actually go and do this. A lot of people have the idea to do it, and then they can never get over the hump, right, of the anxiety and the fear. But I think your purpose of doing this for, not only for your son, but also in aggregate for fatherhood, I'm glad that motivated you strongly enough to do this. So kudos to you, man. But thanks for having me on as your first guest.
No problem.
I'll be the guinea pig as you get your process down and things like that. But so who am I? My job, at least, and then we'll get into fatherhood, which is the purpose of this, but my job is SVP of Sales for Plansight, which is an RFP solution, so technology that insurance brokers use. But from a standpoint of a fatherhood, which I know we were talking today, I have a daughter who's 5, Brooklyn, and I have a son, Sebastian, who's about 19 months old. Definitely have the thoughts about how to build a young boy up into a man, and so I know we'll get into that. And I'm also a husband to Courtney Smith, who's been my wife almost 11 years now, and we've been together 16. Best years of my life as well. Couldn't do anything I'm doing without her, and obviously my kids wouldn't be around without her either.
Yeah, absolutely.
So she's played an integral role in that. But that's me in a nutshell. I mean, background was a soccer player my whole life. Played soccer up and through college. It really shaped me as a person. I think it's shaped me in the way that I interact with my children, and hopefully some of the structure and discipline, fun, play, but sports tell us a lot about life as well. So try to infuse some of those lessons in my job as a dad. But I'm always learning, just like you, man. I don't have all the answers. I'm imperfect as well. But I'm interested in being the best dad I can possibly be.
Great, thank you for that. What we want to discuss today, I think we talked about it before, is several different topics, everything from fitness, fun, family, faith, finance, and really trying to pull from that knowledge that I believe, and a lot of people do, that used to be passed down to us from our dads. Like, here's how to change a tire. Here's how to balance your checkbook. Here's how to budget. But we don't talk about any of that stuff anymore. And I think the YouTube and social media world has taken over that. I mean, I had a great dad growing up, and he knows a lot of stuff about how to do it around the house. Everything from electrical work to, plumbing and pipes. And I was taught none of that.
Yeah.
So I learned from YouTube on how to be a man at home, if you will, how to fix things around the house. So I thought it'd be a great thing to talk to people and see, hey, what did your dad teach you, or what did your dad not teach you that you had to learn later on? And you mentioned being a former collegiate soccer player. Tell me a little bit about fitness. What would you tell your kids or kids out there about fitness? How important it is and why it's important? And I wanted to lead off with this question because we've talked about this several times. The number one thing that the pandemic has shown us is Americans are very unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And that contributed to the death rate piling up. And, how do we become healthier? What do you do? What advice would you give to your kids?
Well, I think the catalyst for me to get interested in health, actually, I can share through a story. I was, 12 years old, and we were supposed to go on a soccer trip to England. Our coach had put together this trip, and so the whole team was going to go. Obviously, going to turn it into a vacation with family and things like that. But about 10 days prior to that, my dad had started having heart trouble. And it was like in the middle of the night. He told my mom he was having pains down his left arm. Oh, wow. And goes in. He was 37 years old at the time. Goes into the doctor. Fortunately, he's okay. He's still with us today. But it was one of those scare events, right? It was the warning event for him. But it prevented him from going on our trip. So I had to go with my mom. My dad didn't get to experience it. And it was one of those, when you're very impressionable, 12, 13 years old, you're being shaped by everything right now, but it's a very profound time in your life. So I remember going, well, wait a second. Why is dad having a heart attack at 37? What did he do wrong? What are some of the things that have triggered this event to have happen in the first place? So I started reading Men's Health magazine. I started getting into nutrition. I gobbled up everything I could because I realized in that moment, hey, this thing, I controlled this. I have to take responsibility in my own health. And so even though I was already a soccer player at the time and we're generally pretty fit, it turned into a passion of mine. I actually have a degree in exercise science as well as business because of it. And it's why I'm about to turn 40 this year, and it's why I'm still in the shape I am today. It's that moment I can draw it back specifically to that trigger. And so in terms of what I do with my kids, my wife she was a collegiate cheerleader, stays fit, still with me today. It's part of our family life. I mean, we go to Lifetime Fitness. We bring both our kids. My daughter, Brooklyn, she gets to do dance and kids yoga and stuff like that. But we just made it such a part of who we are. It's a non-negotiable in terms of our, weekly life. We're going to go to the gym 3, 4, 5 times a week.
Yeah, so they get to see it.
Yeah, so they see it. So for us, it's not like I'm hammering to my daughter, she's 5, or my son who's 19 months, hey, what is fitness? And here's what keto is and fasting. It's more like, here's what mommy and daddy do for a regular part of our life. Sure. Set that example for them.
No, that's a great point, to set the example for them and show them, here's what I do to stay healthy and stay in shape. And there's been several comments my son has made, negatively and positively about other people.
Sure.
And their food choices, their exercise choices, or lack of exercise. And, it's really been a phenomenal experience for me. Again, just like you, having that exercise science background and kinesiology degree, really understanding the human body at a simple level and being able to apply that throughout life. Mm-hmm. And just like you, I'm turning 40 this year or this next year. What does that look like? I'm healthy. I don't have any pre-existing conditions. I feel like I can continue to do this over and over and over again. And for me, not only is it the health aspect of it, everything you get from that point, the aesthetics, looking better. I always believe that if you look better, you feel better. And on top of that, the stress relief. I think later on in life, that's what I'll show my son. Like, here's, if you have that anger, go work out. Go do a hard workout. Go punch the bag. And my favorite podcaster is Joe Rogan, and he talks about exercise being, how he stays sane, how he doesn't murder people. And he's like, I've always been an active person, but I have a lot of stress. I have that pent up anger from having high testosterone. So let me go ahead and work out, and that's how I get rid of my stress. And that's I think the older I've gotten, that's been the key for me to keep my head on straight from a stress standpoint.
Well, it's a pressure valve release is how I kind of look at it. And I work out after work, right? So you get everything kind of pent up in the day, frustrations, things that go well, whatever. But this is, for me, this is the way I decompress after work. So I throw my headphones on, have some really heavy metal in my headphones. I go and lift weights. I then am able to leave there, and the rest of the day, there's kind of a calmness that comes over because, again, you've let it go, right?
Yeah.
You've had your battle for the day. You've won your battle, hopefully, and now, the rest of the day I can be calm and then slide into the fatherhood, the responsibilities I have at home and things like that. But I feel like it makes me a better person to have that pressure valve release through exercise.
Oh, 100%. And for me, I used to own a CrossFit. And in CrossFit, we always talk about learning a new sport. So this past year, I really got into ice hockey and golf, or got better at golf, or still trying to get better at golf. So, but ice hockey was a big point for me to dive into it because my son plays ice hockey, and I felt ill-equipped to give him advice and coach him, since I had never been on the ice and I never played. So I took private lessons for 6 weeks, 2 to 3 times a week, and he knew nothing about it.
Oh, that's cool.
And then I jumped on the ice with him to coach him and teach him. And I better understood from that kinesiology background how to move your body, what you need to do to move the puck, how to handle it, how to be better. And, I still, with my son's private lessons, I'll get on the ice with him and the coach and run through the drills myself. So not only am I getting better, but I'm setting that example for my son as well on, hey, jump into it, do it. Don't just talk about it, be about it. So you want to get better, you want to do that, but at the same time, let's have fun. We incorporate fun from a lot of different aspects, and I think it's a key ingredient people forget about, that you need to have fun. You can't just do stuff because you want to do it.
Well, it has to be sustainable. You have to enjoy it, right? And that's why I feel like whether it's hockey or whether it's CrossFit or whether it's running or rowing or skiing or whatever you want to do, you find the form of physical stimuli that you're passionate about that clicks with you, but you have to enjoy it. So if you're going to do this for the next 20, 30, 40 years of your life, if you don't enjoy it, it's going to be hard to be adherent to it. So I think your point is well taken. It's like, find something you actually want to do as well, that when you do it, you're like, oh, this is fun. And it makes you forget a little bit about the hard work that's involved as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 11 years in the CrossFit, and it's what works best for my body. It's what I like. So that's what I do, and it bleeds into other aspects of my life on how dedicated and consistent I am with something, and again, going back to fatherhood, showing that to your kids. Like, here's how you stay dedicated, you're consistent, and my growth trajectory professionally has been one that was now fueled by consistency. On, I am where I am because I was consistent with things. Yeah. And, that outworking mentality, and I'm just going to wake up and do my job every day and continue to grind at it, is great. But I put fun into it. And that's why I was able to stick with it and be consistent. And for instance, like my son, this past year, 6 months ago, I bought a house and we moved in. Big day for someone, right? Kids don't care. It's just a new place for them to hang out, a new place that they're living at, and they don't care. So, how I brought fun into the equation with that was, I had a Nerf gun battle with him in the new house. Before we moved in, any furniture, everything was absolutely empty. There's nothing we could have broken. And, he showed up. My mom picks him up from school every day. So she picked him up, brought him home, and I just had a little note for him on the door. with a Nerf gun.
Awesome.
And, we commenced on having a Nerf gun battle, and it was fun. So, and anyone...
That's something he's going to remember the rest of his life.
Yeah, he'll remember that. He won't remember me closing on the house, signing those documents, paying a whole bunch of money. He won't remember any of that. But he'll remember, hey, Dad made it fun. Mm-hmm. And, for me, it's all about creating those experiences. And that's what family is about to me, is not only the family that you're born into, but the family that you choose and how you interact with those people. And that leads me to my next question is, is blood really thicker than water? And, tell me about how you grew up and how your heritage affected that, or if it did, or if where your family comes from.
Yeah, I do to a degree, right? I haven't done the full ancestry to like go in and say, all right, well, what percentage are we this or that? But we have an interesting kind of family history from my father's side and mother's side. But my father's side, he grew up on a potato farm in Maine, like a really small town in Maine called Presque Isle, and it's like
okay. I expected you to say Idaho, not Maine.
No, it was Maine, and like near the Canadian border, basically Canada, Maine, and so very hard life growing up. Grew up pretty poor, one of 4 brothers. Mom was educated on a 5th grade level because she had to go start to work. So it was a rough life to grow up in. And he and one of his brothers moved down to Texas, which is how I ended up, being born in Texas, where he met my mom. But I think it shaped him quite a bit of, rugged kind of man's man. He's in construction right now. Grew up poor, so he had a lot of perspective of like the value of a dollar, right? And some of the struggles that people go through. And then my mom was born and raised in Texas. She had a really good family, but father was an ex-World War II veteran. Kind of that, I don't know if you have a grandpa like this, it's like quiet grandpa that just sits in the corner and he's just gone through so much in life. He doesn't say much. He's just kind of there.
Yeah, my grandfather was the same way.
Yeah.
Same thing. World War II veteran and just kept to himself, didn't say a lot.
Yeah, so but he did all the good things for kids, like got you a bond every year for your birthday and got you life insurance. All the things that like he knew to do from a fiduciary responsibility standpoint as a grandpa. This is what you're supposed to do. But you kind of see those different father figures growing up, and I think it does shape who you are as a person. So my parents are still together 41, 42 years now.
Oh, wonderful.
Which is amazing, right? I feel very fortunate. Both me and my 2 sisters grew up in a house where we got to see them struggle through things. We got to thick and thin. There was arguments. It wasn't a perfect home by any means. But, we got to see them kind of battle through it and stick through it and, hopefully get to retire together soon one day as well. And so that's part of who I am as well. I'm very fierce about, trying to go through it as long as you can. Sometimes it just doesn't work. But I think what that precedent they established for me is kind of shaped the way that I view marriage and fatherhood as well.
Yeah, I think we had the same grandpa because mine did the same. Are we related? And I've done 23andMe and Ancestry.com, and no Smiths popped up.
No,
so
there's a lot of us out there, but I think I've got French Canadian background, some German, some English. I'm not sure what the rest of the makeup is, but European, of course, and then Canada has a heavy French population. I think my father's mother actually did immigrate from Canada to the U.S. as well.
So tell me about what your grandfather did from the bond perspective and life insurance perspective. Did he pass that down to your dad and teach him about finances and how to invest for the future? Or was that something you just kind of took from your grandpa?
I had to kind of figure it out on my own. So that was my mother's father, the one that was the World War II veteran. I actually only met my father's father once because he was up in Maine. He passed away when I was really young, and so I didn't really have much influence from that side. But I think just because they, they were back from the era where you buy a house for $12,000 and live in it for 60 years, right?
Yes.
Like he was very regimented about his cars. He would always pay cash for his cars, and he did the math that you had to have it for 8 years for at least it to make sense to pay cash. But every month he was also paying himself like there was a car payment, so that would go into the next car's pool. So he's just very regimented, he was a penny pincher, right? He's very frugal. That's why my grandmother was able to retire. My late grandmother, but she was able to retire, live out her days without having to worry about money. Is because he just was very regimented about his finances, didn't live a lavish life. Nothing was extravagant in anything they did, but it was very purposeful. And even on relatively modest incomes, they were able to build a pretty nice nest egg. So I did absolutely learn from that. But when you're 7 and your grandpa gives you a $50 savings bond, you're like, oh, cool. I'd rather have a G.I. Joe. You know,
can I have
thanks,
G.I.
Grandpa.
Joe? Can I have the cash?
Yeah.
So I could
But
go
then
buy
those
a G.I.
accumulate
Joe?
over time, right? And then you realize, oh, I see what he was doing. Now it maybe wasn't fun or sexy as a gift when I was 7, but when you're 30 or 40, it starts to make sense. I see what he was doing to establish this precedent of how you take care of your money.
Yeah, my grandfather did the same thing. I believe it's a generational thing. I mean, they're called the greatest generation for a reason. And, you know, they went to war for the future. Mm-hmm. And they fought for us. So it doesn't surprise me at all that both of our grandfathers invested for the future. And same thing, my grandfather worked hard, and then, you know, when he came back from the war, used that money that he saved up to buy a house, bought land, bought a house. And, you know, one of the things when he passed away that I inherited was Exxon stock, which is ridiculous because I'm like, how did you foresee Exxon being one of the big players in oil and gas? And, you know, he was always a Ford guy. So, you know, there was Ford stock that was handed down too. So, you know, it really taught me early on. And I didn't tap into that until the past 2 years when I got into investing myself, thinking, okay, I need to invest. I know I need to save up for a college fund. But I thought to myself, what if my son doesn't want to go to college? What if he wants to be an entrepreneur? I need to be able to support that as well. So instead of starting him a college fund, I just started him a graduation fund. So, you know, he helps me pick out stocks. Of course, I lean on the experts in that field as well and what to invest in. And, you know, it's yielded a fantastic amount of money. And it makes me smile every week that I beat the market and what I picked out. And it makes me smile because that's money that my son gets to enjoy and gets to utilize. And, you know, for me, I have my doctorate from the University of Arkansas and a master's from there as well. And then my undergraduate from Texas A&M. I often joke professionally, but not really, that I'm an overeducated idiot. And I try to keep things simple, and that's what makes me good at my job, and that's what makes me good at being a father as well. But I don't believe formal education is the end-all, be-all. Everyone has to go to college. I don't believe that. Mm-hmm. And this is someone that spent a lot of time and money on college and education. If my son decides at the age of 18 he wants to be a YouTuber, if that's still a thing in 10 years, and he wants to go that route, I'll support it. If he wants to buy a franchise and be a business person from day one at the age of 18, go ahead. And what working within higher education taught me while I was getting my degrees was there's a single mind frame on the employees of higher education on staying with a university, getting tenure or getting a job where you keep it for 10, 15 years. And turnover is very low at the leadership level for a university. So that to me, everyone just thinks the same, which in my opinion is not the concept of college. You should be critical thinking and challenging each other and debating and having open conversations, which by the way we don't have anymore in today's society. But to me, it doesn't lend what it used to lend to the marketplace, where if you had a college degree, it gave you a leg up on your competition. Everyone has a degree now. I mean, I could just do a quick Google search and probably find 100 online universities. That's not even looking within the DFW area on, hey, is there an actual campus I can go to? So yeah. What do you want to pass down to your kids about education? Formal education, informal education, or street knowledge, if you will. Knowledge.
From the streets of Mansfield is where I grew up.
The streets of Mansfield. Those are tough, I hear.
I think it's a combination of both, John. I've got an education myself, similar to you. I haven't gone as far as you, but I did have some master's level education in business as well. But I really developed all of my knowledge that's appropriate or applicable in life to after college in the real world, man. I mean, you talked about you go there for a specific reason. There are obviously professions that require a degree and you get very specialized knowledge. But when you go into something, I did business administration plus the exercise science, they're relatively general in nature. And you're not really getting the specialized knowledge because it's not really required. I can go into business, start a business, or go work for a business. Whether or not I have a degree is not really that impactful.
Correct.
So, but I still think that what it shaped me even through as a collegiate athlete, not to come too much back to that, but the purpose kind of was to get an education, but also the continuation of playing soccer, the development of myself as a person, being, responsible enough to get my studies done as well as be, a student athlete. Those things shaped me quite a bit. But if my kids don't go to college, I think I'm okay with it at this point. There is a certain level of indoctrination, like you described earlier. It's dogmatic in the way that they educate people. It doesn't teach them to think critically anymore. And I think that you learn from your parents, from your peers in the real world that doesn't require a diploma in order to get that. And I think even the diploma sometimes might detract from your ability to think critically if you get in this echo chamber that some of the universities have become.
Well, I agree. I mean, I remember the early days of my son being young and all the why questions. Well, why this, Dad? Why this?
Oh, God, I'm going through that phase with my daughter right now.
And, it gets better, but it's funny you talked about having a dogmatic approach because, they're funneled from that always asking why to because I said so. And this is how it is because I said so. And, I still challenge my son to ask why or why are we doing this? And, God love him, it frustrates me, but when we're watching a movie and he asks a million questions on why, and I have to tell him to be quiet, it's like, watch the movie and you'll find out.
The answer
That's
will
usually
be
my
revealed.
answer. Watch, pay attention.
I think that, I think about that with my daughter a lot. She's 5, like I said, 5.5 now, going through that phase of why. They're building a model of the world in their head of how things work. Right?
Oh, 100%.
So I encourage the curiosity for sure. And I think it also maybe is kind of a sign of some leadership skills, right? Like, I don't just accept your answer. I want to know why. I want to determine for myself whether or not I want to follow your instructions, Dad, or maybe there's a better way, or maybe you're too dumb to realize that I actually know what I'm doing. Whatever the case may be, you don't want to pound that out of them, right? And not physically pound it, but intellectually say no. Stop asking why. That curiosity, I hope she carries through the rest of her life. Now, she'll be a little less annoying probably about asking why 100 times, but that I want her to still have that because that passion to understand and to know, that's going to be way more useful than to get whatever degree she ends up getting. You ask why and you want to fully understand and break down how things work, then you can rebuild them or you can build a better version of some model because you've asked why and you actually get it distilled down to the moving parts. And so I appreciate that about her. Can be annoying sometimes, like we said. and you laugh at it, but it's like she's just learning, man. And
I think back to my childhood of what did I learn from my dad, or one of the most influential men in my life growing up was my Uncle Henry, and things that he said consistently. And he was a retired Marine. He's one of the reasons I joined the Marine Corps was he set a good example, and he would always say, "Look at it. Figure it out." So, have that critical thinking aspect of it and try to figure it out for yourself. But on top of that, he was trying to teach me how to find the answer and seek out the answer. Not that you're going to know it out of, thin air, but how to ask questions properly to get to that answer. And, there's several times where he just said, you have to be smarter than the stupid machine that you're working on.
Well, it's also the Socratic approach, right? It's like you keep asking somebody questions until they arrive at the answer themselves, right? So you can turn that around with your kid and ask them, well, why do you think that is? And well, if so, okay, why? Like, and you start turning it around on them and let them come to their own conclusion and get their own answer themselves. And they're a lot smarter, I think, than we think because they just soak up everything all the time. And often I find I can turn the tables on her a little bit and she'll figure it out. And I don't have to tell her why. She determines her own conclusion as to why.
Sure. And I try to use that aspect for everything when I'm trying to teach my son about something that I believe is important. And, one of those things, we talked about fitness, also is nutrition, food. How important is nutrition? It's fuel that you're putting in your body. Here's why you need to watch out what you're looking for. But at the same time, enjoy a meal. If it's a cheat meal or if it's a splurge. I mean, I've been very fortunate to eat at Michelin star restaurants and be, have dinner made by a James Beard Award winning chef. And are those healthy? Absolutely not. Almost never. But they're delicious. Yep. And it gets you to appreciate food and understand, how important it actually is in our life. And if I remember correctly, and this is why it's on one of my questions, is I believe the obesity rate for children grew by 50% during the pandemic.
Okay.
So we didn't set a great example for what to eat in the first place. The Happy Meals. Thanks to Happy Meals, we've been indoctrinated to go through a window and pick it up, and that's the easiest, most convenient thing. And we never taught about nutrition. So my son is now learning more about that, on how it affects your sleep, how it affects your ability to play sports, how that longevity that we consistently talk about of, being consistent with your nutrition is going to lead to better health down the road. So you don't have to worry if another pandemic comes across because you're healthy.
I had an interesting experience, and I think you're probably right with the kids. Obviously they were all shut in for a period of time, right? Or discouraged from going outside and playing, of all things, right? Don't get out and get sun.
Yeah,
one of friends.
Where we used to live at.
Yeah, bananas. But anyway, so of course, there was many reasons why I think they probably contributed to that. But I actually found the experience was very different early on in the pandemic. We went running outside because the gyms were closed. And I actually lost weight during it because it was like, hey, well, I can run 4 or 5 days a week and go do some push-ups and pull-ups on the playground outside because that's the only equipment I have access to. And so I think it's also like, how do you approach it? And you're going to teach your son how to respond if something ever happens like that again. You've set him an example of what to do that's maybe the opposite of what the world is doing, right? I think I actually have a post I've never actually posted, but I've written about do the opposite of kind of what you're told, because what you're told typically is misaligned with what's actually best for you. And so I think if you can position your son to be confident enough to go, all right, well, the world is doing this, but I actually believe this is the best thing to do instead, to have the confidence to stand alone and go the opposite direction, man.
I mean, I did the same thing during the pandemic with my nutrition. Like you said, what is the rest of the world doing? I'm going to go the opposite. And, I have a thirst for knowledge. And so I listen to a lot of Joe Rogan, read a lot of books, or listen to a lot of books. And, one thing that kind of sparked my interest was an interview with Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. And he talked about the carnivore diet. And then he talked about, Paul Saladino, the carnivore MD. And, I read his book. And I thought, let's give this a shot. What's the worst that can happen? I eat a bunch of red meat and bacon.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound too bad.
Yeah.
So I tried it. I lost 10 pounds. I kept the weight off. I felt great. I didn't feel bloated all the time. Now, would I recommend that for everyone? Absolutely not. And that's another point that I'd like to make within what we learned from the pandemic. And that was, we tried to treat everyone the same and have the same approach when we shouldn't have. And that's how I view nutrition, is if it works for my son, great, but maybe he needs more carbohydrates than I do to function. Maybe, he needs more fat. He needs less protein. Who knows? We're all different. So to have one recommendation for, someone's health, to me, makes no sense, because we're all biologically different and we digest.
Well, but there are those things that, like, broadly speaking, tend to work well, at least in a short period of time, for almost everybody, right? Yes. So the carnivore diet's a great example of that. It's an elimination diet at the end of the day. You're eliminating food triggers, allergens, things like that you may not be aware of or in your body that are causing that bloat, causing you to retain water, causing you to be uncomfortable. And so I think even, you're right, it's not for everybody. But I think generally speaking, there are things that you pick those apart or out of the pile of options that tend to work better for more people if tested. And I think that's one of those examples that tends to work for almost everybody that tries it, at least in the short term.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about one of the best meals you had and why it was that way.
Oh, well, so the best meal I had lately was a steak. Marshall Allen was on my podcast, the guy that wrote the Never Pay the First Bill. If you're in the insurance industry, you probably know that book. But we went to a steakhouse, Randy Steakhouse in Frisco the other day. I've never been there before. I drive by it all the time. It's, Frisco has this old downtown where, they take those old houses and then eventually they all turn into businesses. Well, Randy Steakhouse is this really old house. But I kept driving by and thinking, man, that's probably pretty good steak in there. And so Marshall and I, after a night podcast, said, hey, do you want to go get food? What's open? Randy Steakhouse is 0.2 miles away. Probably one of the best steaks I've ever had, man. I think he had a New York strip. I had a ribeye, huge 16-ounce, boneless ribeye. And to your point, we both, he was doing keto. I've tried to, stay relatively low carb or zero carb sometimes. So we just did a steak. I think we did a little bit of a mushroom dressing with some asparagus, but that steak was probably one of the best cooked steak that I've ever had. Threw some butter on top of it, just to take it over the top. And we were both just sitting back afterwards going, wow, that's probably one of the best steaks I've ever had. So I think you can't ever go wrong with just a beautiful piece of red meat, man.
Oh, I'd agree with you. And, I've already shared, I do the carnivore diet or the meat-based diet as they now, because I eat some fruit. It's good for me to intake some carbohydrates for my workouts that way. And, I can remember my best meal actually was gray sweater in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. A lot of people are like, why Oklahoma City?
I love Oklahoma City, by the way.
And it was a 7-course meal and everything was made from scratch. There wasn't a menu. And the chef, Chef Andrew Black, was fantastic. He's actually now nominated for a James Beard Award. And just to talk to him about food, he goes, I'm going to take you down a culinary journey. Tonight's not just dinner, it's a journey. So I had a grilled cheese sandwich at a nice restaurant. And obviously it was small, but it was the best grilled cheese sandwich I ever had. And I was like, how in the world does someone think of that? And again, it's just leaning on those pieces or leaning on those experts that they have that knowledge. And hey, here's why it works that way, and here's how I made it. Here's, and I love to cook. I love to eat. I love to cook. So great combination, and I love trying new recipes and trying to make things better. So that was the best meal for me ever because it wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting your traditional nice meal. They sit down, serve you a salad, soup, and then you progress, and nothing was inside the box at this restaurant.
I love it.
And that was fantastic.
Very cool. And I do have to give a shout out to another restaurant here. If I ever have a recurring place that I like to go, my wife and I love Mexican Sugar. I don't know if you've ever been there in Plano.
Yes.
They have a pork chop that's a bone-in pork chop. My God, it is. You don't think the pork chop are like would be a thing that I choose over everything else on the menu, but I don't know how they do it. It's super thick, tender, season it really well. We get the same thing every time, and I get that bone-in pork chop, and I would eat that 7 days a week if I had the means and could afford to go there every time. But it's incredible, dude. So that's like if I ever to go back to something, you told me the best dish in town that you'd eat all the time, I'd say that pork chop at Mexican.
But is it as good as the Perry Steakhouse pork chop?
Yeah, actually, yes, it is, man. Yeah. I'm going to tell you, I think it's
better.
Right,
I'm going to say it's better,
bro. So let's go to lunch one day and then we'll get big old pork chop.
So, we're running up on time, but I wanted to talk about relationships. Okay. It's a big thing. Again, because one of the things the pandemic showed us was, people were socially disconnected. We need that human connection, and not only from a mental health standpoint, but just from a societal standpoint. Tell me about your thoughts on friendship, the difference between relationships with your guys and your girlfriends, and how do you manage all that, and what does that teach your kids?
Well, I was difficult at first, man. I don't know if you're like me. We're both social guys, I think. And the fact that you couldn't go out and meet people, clients, prospects, foster those relationships in person was kind of devastating for me up front. It led me down the path of this stuff, though. I mean, the virtual shift and Zooms and recording video, making podcasts, that never would have happened. If I was going to think of anything came out of the pandemic for me personally that was good. But man, it was rough. I mean, you start realizing how you miss, like I kept seeing this like, advertises contactless this or contactless that. I'm like, we need contact. Like contact is good. Shake totally my hand, agree. Give me a hug, give me a bro hug, whatever. Those things, that little touch of another person, that connects you with other people. And so I've shifted the way I interact with people, but I think it reinforced how important that is to us, like on a micro level, but an aggregate level as well as a society, not fearing other people, not, needing to stay away from people. I think I even went the other direction. I sought out friends that want to hang out. I found clients that were willing to go get a drink or go to a restaurant when everybody else was scared. I'm like, no, let's do it. Are you cool? Let's go do it.
Texas,
it became exciting.
We were open quite much more.
A lot earlier than most people were, but you almost felt like you had to go to a speakeasy, right, to get the human interaction. But if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's right in the middle. The socialization, the connection with people, it's an integral part of that pyramid. So it's just made it even more important to me to have great friendships. The relationship I have with my wife and kids when we were stuck at home for a while together, that's all we really had. That just became even more of a crucial element to who I am. And it also opened me up to realize I'm a more social person than I thought. I thought I was a little more introverted, and now I crave being social with other people. And I may not have come to that realization if it hadn't happened.
No, I agree. When I got sent home and I now consistently work from home, it was a huge adjustment. And I think companies are now barely figuring it out on how do we handle that? Do we make people come back to the office? Do they like working at home? I absolutely hate it, but I don't have a choice. So I work from home and I go out and visit folks. And luckily for me during the pandemic, I was a member of a private club. So they stayed open during the pandemic because it was a private club. It wasn't just your office. So that place kept me sane because I could actually talk to people there. Mm-hmm. And, it's in downtown, Tower Club in downtown. They have fantastic food, but the service there was phenomenal, especially during the pandemic. Like they were consistently cleaning, so you felt safe. They were wearing the proper PPE, and you felt comfortable going out and being around people again. And that's, I really took that to heart during the pandemic because when we were on lockdown here in Dallas, which wasn't very long, it was tough. Mm-hmm. I went through a little bit of a depression of not being around people and constantly being on the phone or being on Zoom. Yeah. And it just wasn't fun. And when you're an extrovert and a people person like I am and like you are, it's tough to not have that interaction and those discussions.
Well, I don't think I don't know if we'll know the full residual effects for years of especially with children and stuff like that. You talk about depression, anxiety that developed, developmental problems that some of the younger kids had as well. I think that the kind of unintended consequences are going to be profound. And I think depression is one of the biggest ones. I went through it, not being able to see friends, not being able to see clients, coworkers. Like I would go to an office early on where I was in a shared workspace and I was the only person in the building, dude. It was weird. I'd drive down the tollway, get to go 100 miles an hour. That was kind of fun. But drive down the tollway because nobody was commuting. And then I'd go into a building, and it was just me in the building, except the one person that was running common desks, and she was making coffee every day. But you talk about it felt like almost apocalyptic at times. And I don't think you realize how much you lose when the world isn't just operating what we take for granted. I even got to a point where I was missing traffic. Like I wanted,
you wanted to sit in traffic.
I wanted rush hour traffic because at least I know the economy was out here. Yeah, exactly, dude. So again, I don't know how that will all play out. I think hopefully it's going to be a boomerang and people are getting back together more often. We're having open conversations again like this, so you can actually have a conversation with somebody and talk and go deep into a subject and not feel afraid of what you say and things like that.
Yeah, and I think, especially within our industry at least, we are preparing for that because we don't just handle medical insurance; we handle mental health as well. So I was in Vegas this past weekend and the past couple of days for a conference out there, and I met with a mental health company. And they are actually tackling pediatric mental health now. And they said the same thing you did. We don't want to wait to see the impact that the pandemic has had on our kids from not having human contact, human interaction. I mean,
I think the vocal development.
I want to see how many kids can actually pick up on facial expressions and what you mean because they've had to wear masks the whole time. And
think about speech, right?
Yeah, they didn't
learning speech when you can't see somebody's mouth move, right? And just like the impediments to speech when you're Again, like we're probably going too far down this path. I don't know if you want to, but it's like just kids learning to actually talk. If you can't see another human's mouth, how it shapes and tonality and expression, well, you think what that's doing to a 2-year-old.
I have a few friends that are speech pathologists, and they talked about, how busy they are. And they all believe it's because they had to wear masks the whole time. It impeded their progress on how to actually talk and utilize their mouth, their tongue, and different inflections in the voice. And, I think I'm hopeful that we will solve that issue. And, especially with us seeing it in our children right now. And, how are we going to tackle that? How are we going to tackle their mental health? And, really dive into what other problems may arise because of that. If you're not used to human, if you're not used to human interaction, how are you going to talk to people?
Yeah.
To me, the conflict in the Ukraine right now is evident of that. That people can't sit down at a table and talk and have a discussion on how to have peace. It's how do we win? Is the conversation. So there's no more compromise. And I think that's what's missing, not only in the U.S., but in the world. And that's why we're seeing the impact.
Well, you're describing missing of nuance, right? Like it's an either-or proposition always. It's like either you're on team A or team B or team this or team that, and there is no in-between where most people actually exist. So I have the ability to have a conversation, disagree, but still come to some sort of conclusion or compromise of maybe what's best. We've lost that art for sure. I'm glad you're podcasting. That's why I podcast. Let's dive into something for an hour, work through it together, right? I don't have to be this or that or bipolar. It's just we're human beings that have a lot of complexity, and talking is how we figure out things by having a conversation and listening to each other's ideas.
Yeah, we evolved from the ape species. So, being able to talk is one of those things that has separated us from other animals, and that communication is extremely important, especially in today's society where everything is done digitally. And, I know people that prefer to text over speaking on the phone. And there's a lot of times where I'm like, just call me. This would be a quicker conversation.
You know what this phone in your hand does? It makes calls.
Yes. Yeah. I kind of miss the old days of the flip phones, the little Motorola Razors that we had. So, that made it easier to call people and discuss things over the phone instead of text message or, DMs, whatever way you communicate with people that's not verbally. And I think that's going to affect society and our kids tremendously. It's teaching them the art of communication again.
Well, communication has evolved, but still at the end of the day, it's two people or multiple people talking to each other. We're actually formulating ideas in our head and expressing them, and you understand what I'm saying. And it's almost like this dance a little bit that we go through together. But I think, like you said, it's the thing that separates us from animals. There's a divinity in the ability to speak. That's why I love to do it on a daily basis. But it's because you're coming up with better ideas. You're coming up with what works, and we're doing it together. There's a collaborative element that's involved in speaking that is interpersonal. It's somewhat nonverbal. All those things happen when you have a conversation with a person. And so I'm so glad that this medium is becoming so prevalent and so popular. And I'm happy to be a part of it too.
I agree. I think that's why I'm so quote unquote addicted to podcasts. Is I learn so much from it, and I'm a verbal learner. I'm a visual and verbal learner. I learn best in that mindset and that mind frame. And I think we've lost that. And like you said, I love that podcasts have brought that back. And there's a reason they're so popular. There's a reason everyone has one now, including myself, which I don't think I would have ever told someone, I'm going to start a podcast. But I felt it was important enough to discuss, what's going on and the knowledge that we want to pass down to our kids, because they're the ones that are affected most by the pandemic. And we're going to have to cross that bridge one day, and we need to be prepared.
Yeah.
And I know for me, for instance, since it's Easter weekend, tomorrow is Good Friday, I set an example for my son on faith too. On at the end of the day, only so much is in my control, And, no matter what you believe in or who you believe in, I think that higher power is great. It gives you hope that, things will be all right and we're going to get out of this. And, to me, having my son understand what Easter is about or what Christmas is really about, I know I'm doing a great job when he understands that. And it's not just about presents. It's not about finding a bunch of candy and an egg, but it's a deeper calling and a deeper power than we understand. And that's why I'm actually positive about the future. Is I because of my faith, I believe, hey, there's a higher purpose for all this stuff, and it's going to teach us how to be better people and better humans.
Well, I think there'll be a revival. I really do. I think there's going to be a pullback to a faith-based focus. I think you're seeing it in some of the kids. You're seeing it a lot bear itself out, even social media, the popularity of kind of that faith-based approach to life. I think it's taken us where now you're going to see a resurgence. I really do. And so I'm glad you're incorporating that into your life as well. I think it's good for our kids, and I think it's good for the future of the country too.
No, and I would agree with that. I think it's key because it ultimately takes ego out of the equation.
Yeah.
And, ego can be a very formidable enemy. It's taken down some of the smartest and most powerful people in the world over history. And, I not only have my faith, but I do daily readings and read about Stoicism, and that has taught me a tremendous amount. And I know someone's probably watching this thinking, oh, okay, well, this guy follows the meat-based diet. He's a Stoic, and like, how many influencers is he following on social media that just talk about that stuff? But it's just what's worked for me. And, it helps me combat those mental health, issues that we all have on understanding things, and gets me to think critically on, okay, what is in my control, what's out of my control. And that has helped tremendously with business on being able to understand, well, what are the variables I can control, what are the variables I can not control, and how to tackle it. And being able to pass that down to my son and get him to understand that. It's been a task, but it's been tremendous. And
well, and like you said, we're both coming on 40, right? But we're not fully formed people yet at 40. There's something, I think, exciting about the fact that you're still, beta testing things like this.
I'd like to think I'm just about to hit my stride.
Yeah. I feel like I'm getting into my stride too, man. And I used to think when I was 12 that 40 was old, right? And now you get to it and you're like, well, take pretty good care of yourself and treat your body right and stay consistent, like you said earlier. It's not that bad, actually, right? And I feel like we're both just getting started, man. So you're doing a good job, John.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So we'll get started on wrapping this up, but I don't want to miss some things out. So we'll talk about you're a dad of a son and a daughter. Mm-hmm. What's the difference in advice that you would give for each of them?
I'm still figuring out the son, at 19 months old.
He's
but
not
the biggest difference, right, is having both of those dynamics in the house, right? I saw what worked for my daughter. I see how she learns. She's very heavily to the intellect side, but she's a little bit more orderly. She likes to play with dolls. And then all of a sudden, Sebastian gets introduced to the fold, and the dude's just a little animal. So I know that
I know
the way that
animals.
I know, man, and it's like, oh, I see how I'm going to have to just use kind of physicality, playing with him in a physical way, a lot of, boundary setting because he's constantly testing those boundaries. He's constantly trying to hurt himself accidentally as well, which I think most boys do. And so I think the way that I approach him, the way that I interact with him, the way that I even talk to him, even though he's still developing language, is far different than the way I treat my daughter. And you have to know how to approach both slightly differently because they learn differently and they're shaped differently as people.
I'm glad you discussed it that way because it's one of the points that was actually in the boy crisis on that relationship between a mother and their child and a father and their child. And before I talk about this, I wanted to with the podcast, I'm not saying mothers aren't important.
Yeah.
I'm not saying women aren't important in life. I'm saying that we have consistently seen a decrease in the involvement of fathers in their child's lives. And that has led us down a path that we need to get away from and get back on path with. And within the boy crisis, it talked about the relationship between the mother and the child is that bond is really developed between birth and the age of 4. And it goes back to, historical times of, around 4 years old is, like you said, a little bit more physical with the father. They want, our boys want to wrestle us. They want to push the boundaries and see how far can I push dad physically, mentally, and challenge him, and what can I get away with? And, in the Spartan days, the sons went off at the age of 9 or 10. I can't remember exactly. And they learned how to become a man. And it was, at the age of 4 till when they left, that the father needed to help develop their kid to prepare them for that training that they were going through. And then they were going to come back a man. And if you've ever seen the movie 300, they go over that at the very beginning of the movie. Like this was the culture. This is how they were taught. And it's who we are biologically as, human beings. We're supposed to prepare those boys to be men and those girls to be women, and how do they handle themselves? And, I only know my aspect and my experience with my son. I'm raising a man. So I do things a certain way with him, but I also, again, step back and think critically, how does he learn the best? How does he, really absorb that information? And how can I make it fun so he understands it and he enjoys it and he doesn't feel like he's being lectured or talked down to? So it's a great point that you brought up.
Well, and I know
being physical with your kid and
the
yes, treating your son and your
aspect
daughter
is important, though. I think I've noticed my son likes to struggle. Like he loves to overcome some obstacle, right? Like a physical obstacle. Like
mine's the opposite.
How do I climb up on that thing, right? Like this dude wants to climb up on everything he can, or something's heavy, he wants to go pick it up. Like the other day, my wife got a little 8-pound bag of soil for some potted plants. Well, she set it out on the back patio and set her flowers, 10 feet away. Well, Sebastian goes over and figures out, well, can I pick this up? He kind of struggled with it for a minute, was able to pick it up, and he walked it over to where he believed it was supposed to be. But he just wanted to do that. No, it was I'm like, okay, I see you, buddy.
How'd you figure that out?
I don't know. But he just likes physical challenge. And I didn't taught him that. That's who he is. So that could be innate. But I do think you encourage your sons especially, and girls not excluded, but your sons especially, how to physically overcome difficult things, because those things will shape us as men. That's how you'll become successful. That's how you need to be hardened for the world when you end up becoming the patriarch of the family as well. And so I just know that I'll do a little bit more of that, but he also has some of that in him too. So I want to facilitate his desire to struggle and challenge and overcome as much as I can.
No, and that's a good point. That struggle. I think we're too comfortable in the world right now, and people either forgot about their struggle or they never really had to deal with any. And, one of the toughest things I went through was a divorce over 2 years ago. And, when I was going through it, I thought to myself, I've been through worse. Mm-hmm. I literally sat in Reagan National Airport with $20 to my name and everything I owned in a green duffel bag with a torn shoulder. And no plan. My plan was, to be a career officer in the Marine Corps, and to sit there and say, well, there goes my plans for my dream. Yeah. I need to figure something out. So to be there back in 2009 and to be where I'm at today, buying a house and driving a nice car, being successful in business. And I'm not saying money equals success, but from where I was in a mental mindset, in 2009, sitting in Reagan National Airport, until now, it's a totally different person. Mm-hmm. And that struggle has helped me grow, even through that divorce and everything else that I've dealt with. It's always not that bad.
Well, I think I've been introduced to a new concept recently, positive stress, right? Like human beings need a positive form of stress that's constantly sort of testing us. Our bodies respond to it. Our minds respond to the stressors as well. When you get too complacent or too comfortable or too soft, you end up devolving as a human being. So I think that is important, especially for men to understand, is you need to constantly have an appropriate level of stress. There can be an overwhelming level of stress that actually obviously has negative impacts, but finding that thing that gives you something that pushes you forward, right? There's
Sure.
it's a band I listen to right now. It's a heavy metal band, but they have a 3-line: suffer, grow, become. And it's like you suffer, you become out of growth, right? The growth is a result of the suffrage. And then you become who you are on the other side of that. So you became who you are on the other side of going.
And maybe you already said this, but we've got like a minute left.
Yeah.
So, one thing that I want to end pretty much every podcast with is, if you died tomorrow, what advice would you want your kids, or what would you want to give them, or what would you want them to know?
For me, at the end of the day, speaking truth and being a good person supersedes any level of monetary success you have. If you do the right things in this life, and people that when you're not there talk about you and they say good things, I think that's all that really matters. And so every day I approach life honest with the people I interact with, treat them well, smile at them, shake their hand, make eye contact, just try to leave a slightly, net positive impact to the world. And I think that's all that matters at the end of the day.
No, I absolutely love it, and I agree. Again, Spencer, thank you for being the first guest.
Thank you for having me as the first guest, man.
I appreciate it. I look forward to the next episodes and, getting together with you outside of here and discussing this even more.
Yeah, and we'll get a bone-in pork chop at Mexican Sugar.
Sounds good.
I did. Appreciate you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for joining Rad Dad Podcast, everyone. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode.